I want to be a creator. I want to be a creative. I want to tell stories. They had a story that had been told to them for generations. They lived with this story that they thought was going to be their story forever. And they chose a different story. They chose a story of freedom for themselves, for their children, for the generations beyond. Hello, fellow creatives. I'm Mark Graham of the Mindful Storyteller, the channel where creativity, story, and freedom come alive. Here you'll find tips for storytelling and craft, runes and other tools for creative insight, and glimpses of a life lived on purpose along the path less traveled. We'll wax philosophical, wend esoteric, and weird out with the nerdy, with a wink toward irreverence. Because story isn't just entertainment. It's how we come to grips with who we are, learn to appreciate the differences among us, and shape a world better than the one we were given. So if you're ready to create boldly and live with intention, join me here weekly, where we will explore the realms of creativity together.
Why do you believe story is so important for humans?
We're just jumping right into it. Great. Story is critical for human development and growth, for being human. It's how we grow. It's how we learn. It's how we share experiences across time and space without having to experience those things for ourselves. It's transformative in transformation without the pain, but it gives us the ability to grow and transform in a less painful, less destructive manner than, say, natural evolution.
How has story shaped your own life and identity?
I come from a long line of oral storytellers, but oral storytelling was really never my strength. Maybe being the youngest in a family of 6, an extended family of hundreds, I just couldn't get a word in edgewise. Plus, I'm naturally rather introverted. But in story, we're able to find connections that aren't necessarily there naturally. In story, we can find our chosen tribe. We can visit new worlds. We can experience things that maybe our small lives might never lead us to engage with. So for me, story was a way to live bigger, to grow beyond my relatively small world.
And what do you mean when you say that story isn't just entertainment?
Story is entertainment. It should be entertainment. We learn much more when we're engaged on all levels, emotional and intellectual, than we do simply by learning from a textbook or a lecture. So story has to be entertaining for it to be effective, but it's so much more. I've said before, story is technology. It's a tool of human evolution. And mindful storytelling should be just that. We want to entertain our audience. We have to entertain our audience, but it should be with a purpose in mind. We don't want to beat anyone over the head with whatever philosophy or religion or rule-based order that we happen to subscribe to. But we want to change our reader. If a reader doesn't come away changed somehow, then they've just wasted a lot of time, a lot of energy on something that really doesn't matter. So the story should be entertaining, but it should also be a transformative experience for our readers.
So how can writers and non-writers use story in their daily lives?
I think we use story in daily life all the time, even without trying. Anytime, even if we're giving someone directions, we're giving someone change at the grocery store, however we move through life, however we carry ourselves, we're telling a story. Whether intentionally or not, other people are making stories about us as we will pass on the street, as we're getting on or off the metro. Story is shorthand, and it's how we communicate deeper resonances and deeper truths with those around us in a common language that we can share, whether we have a shared set of symbols or not. Story is universal communication.
What role does creativity play in living on purpose?
But I would say to living a life on purpose or with purpose, creativity is key to that. Creativity is the ability to conceive of something, to imagine something that doesn't yet exist, or that has no parallel in the world around us. And the life that I want to live, the life that you may be intending for yourself or purposing for yourself, can't exist until you imagine it and create it. So creativity is the sine qua non. It's the prerequisite for a life lived with purpose and intention. Because if we can't visualize it, if we can't create it in our minds, how do we create it in the real world?
How did you first come to work with the runes?
That's kind of a long story. I'll tell it as briefly as I can. I was raised fundamentalist Protestant, and so all things esoteric were off limits as a kid, which of course made me want to learn more about them. So as soon as I was able to kind of find my own way, I began exploring different esoteric traditions, first in the Western or Christian tradition, but then going back in time. My last name is Graham, which is traditionally Scottish, so I began exploring some of the Celtic mysticism. And while there's a rich, really beautiful tradition associated with that, for some reason it never quite clicked. And then I did a DNA test and found that my heritage is more Norse or Norman than Scottish or Celtic. So I began studying some of the Old Norse traditions, and it really began to click with me then. And that's when I discovered the runes and the depth and the history available there, and it clicked.
And what makes runes different than other symbolic systems like, say, tarot?
I think the runes are different, say, for example, tarot, in that they're very stark, they're plain. Even though we've developed a visual set of runes, rune representations, the runes on their own are just lines at different angles, different connections. In tarot and even in the journey runes, which are more symbolic, the visual activates a different part of the brain, of the mind-body system. With the runes, because they're so stark, I find they're much more effective in just getting right down to the meaning of the rune itself without having to parse through or being influenced by the scene, the visual imagery of whatever card might be coming up. So while there's a lot of commonality between the runes and particularly, say, the major arcana of the tarot, the simplicity in the design makes them much more effective for the way my mind and my creativity work together.
How do you use runes as tools for both creativity and writing?
There are a lot of ways that I invoke the runes and use them both in my creative and writing life and in my personal life as well. I use a number of different rune castings or spreads, card spreads, to tackle different story challenges, different story problems. It might be a single card just to get an inspiration or a theme. It could be anywhere from 3 to a 9 card rune casting that explores a more expanded view, a more nuanced view of character, scene, even the entire framework of the story. And then we also have some rune dice and a symbolic tray with a mandala in it to really dig in and get juicy with some of the symbolism, overlapping threads of attachment and connection. So they provide a lot of different unique and interoperating ways for the runes to draw forth from my unconscious the answer or the solution to whatever my question is.
And do runes predict the future, or do they do something else?
I wouldn't say they predict the future. For me, the runes and all divination tools, really, I think the core function of them is to provide a conduit between the different levels of consciousness. Now, we live in our ordinary conscious, our ego-based consciousness, all our waking hours. That's why it's called the waking consciousness. There are at least 9 levels of consciousness, and I think there could be more depending on how you cut them and parse them. But our waking consciousness, the ordinary level of awareness, is very limited. It has to be. It has to be. Our mind has to filter out at least 95% of our input, or we would lose our minds. There's just so much happening around us. But all that input is being recorded, and it's being parsed and sorted and placed in different buckets and different levels of consciousness. So in ordinary consciousness, we're dealing with a couple of bullet points on all the information that's happened around us. How divinatory tools can appear to predict the future is it's dealing with a complete wiki, a full encyclopedia of knowledge of everything that informs that little bit of information that we're consciously aware of. So in the sense of predicting the future, what it's really doing, it just has a larger data set from which to draw information on what has happened, which then gives us a better sense of how all of those pieces, parts may come together and in what direction the current string of events may play out. It's not predicting the future, but it's giving you a much better idea of how things are moving, how they're flowing, and what's likely to be the results of all those events and pieces of data than just what we carry around in our heads.
And do you find yourself returning to a particular rune over and over? And if so, why?
It's hard to pick one because they are so rich, and each one has a special meaning at a given time. However, El Haj, it's the one just over my shoulder here, is the elk. It means protection, it means guidance. It can be symbolized, as you can see, by the elk's antlers, which are a powerful tool of protection. But it's also the shaman standing between the people and nature, the people and the gods, in that place of protection and guidance. For me, that's a very powerful symbol. When it comes up in a reading, whether for story or personally, you get a little chill, get a little waver in the voice. For me, it's just a really, it's a strong and personally evocative rune.
Okay, so you've described your channel as a little philosophical, a little nerdy, and not a little irreverent. What does that mean to you?
I wouldn't say it necessarily means anything. That's just who I am. I'm a little philosophical. I'm a lot nerdy, and I'm maybe more than a little irreverent sometimes. Really, that's just a reflection of my personality and how I tend to approach topics. I like to understand the why behind things. What did Jung have to say about something? What did Aristotle have to say? What have the great minds of history discovered and found to be true, not just for themselves, but broadly true across humanity? I'd like to understand those things. But I'll get into the weeds and I will nerd out on other types of story, into getting into the nerddom of sci-fi and fantasy, of the rune casting, and even into the nerddom of technology. How can we harness AI to empower our storytelling? So that nerdy aspect, I used to joke when I was a kid that I wasn't cool enough to be a nerd. I had the proclivity, it's in my DNA, to be that kind of weird guy who likes to explore random things. So that's just part of my personality. And the irreverence, stick around, you'll find out.
So how do you balance the serious and the playful when you're exploring big ideas?
I think that balance is critical, especially when we're dealing with big ideas like creativity, like story, like a purposeful, purpose-driven life. In our society today, particularly Western society, particularly American society, it's too easy to be serious about everything. And it's that seriousness without playfulness, without humor, that drives the wedges between people, that drives them to radical behavior. There are serious issues that need to be addressed soberly and with due consideration, but we also need the good humor. If we get so caught up on a single emotion, a single approach to an issue, we close ourselves off to alternate paths, to alternate solutions. So taking that balance, treating things with their due concern and their due seriousness, but also with that touch of humor and good cheer. That is how we can grow and how we can address challenging issues and communicate with one another, even if we're on different levels and different sides of an argument. Humor is universal in humanity. And it's that universality, even different styles of humor, of course, can vary among people, but the nature of humor, it's that leavening, it's that thing that where we can find commonality even when serious issues would otherwise drive us apart.
And what's one misconception about esoteric or woo practices that you'd like to challenge?
There are aspects of the esoteric, the woo, on both sides that I really kind of want to challenge. On the reductionist, the materialist, the serious and sober, thoughtful side, it's the notion that the esoteric is so lofty, so in the clouds, with no bearing on how life really works. I'm an engineer by training, by inclination. So my entire life, or at least my adult career, has been about finding out how systems work in the real world, finding real world solutions to real world problems, and applying those in a sober, rational manner. But I also find that so much of humanity, we've got this much in the real world, in the nuts and bolts of world of reality, but so much of our being is not here. We're in different planes, different levels of consciousness, different levels of reality, and real world solutions cannot possibly address all of who we are. So that esoteric side, well, let me flip the script. On the other side of the equation is the notion that, well, the real world, the the cut and dry nuts and bolts solutions don't have any validity. And that's not true either, because while we're part of many, many worlds and levels of consciousness, we are part of this physical existence. So we need real world practical solutions as well. So it's the fact that, or the notion that it's either or, that it's one or the other, near the twain shall meet, is fallacious. We live in many worlds. Our solutions are going to come from many worlds, and both the practical and the esoteric have their purpose, and they come together in exactly what we're talking about, in storytelling, in creativity, in intentional living. Yeah, we need to know how to pay the bills, but we can tap into the esoteric, into the different realms of consciousness to give us more creative and more nuanced ways of earning the money to pay those bills. So they should go hand in hand. And the fact that there is a dichotomy between them, I think maybe that's the biggest fallacy that I would want to challenge.
What led you to leave the U.S. and settle in Portugal?
What inspired us to leave the States was a combination of things. The real drive was exactly what I want to talk about on this channel, which is that purpose-driven, intentional life. I want to be a creator. I want to be a creative. I want to tell stories. And in the States, cost of living, pace of life, the distance from home to work, all these things really cut into time and resources. And so part of that drive was finding a place where fewer resources would be needed from time, money, whatever, to support that creative lifestyle, that life of storytelling. So where could we go where those demands on us would be less? And we searched around, we looked, and Portugal had that. Not just from a matter of resources, but also for the history, the culture, the food and wine, the lifestyle. It ticked all of the boxes for us. I'm not going to say it's for everyone, or that everyone needs to leave the States for if they want to pursue an intentional life, a life of creativity or storytelling. Many people obviously do that in the States, do it very well. But for me, for my wife, we're both storytellers, this was the place where we were best going to be able to do that and to tap into that well of creativity and have a lifestyle that we really, really enjoy.
And how do you think that living abroad influences your creative work?
A couple of ways. I am among my works are historical novels. So Portugal is, I want to say, the oldest political entity on the continent. So it's rich with history. So from a historical novelist standpoint, being here on the doorstep of Europe, having all of that history available to us, even just within Portugal, is fantastic.
And what lessons has Portugal taught you about story and freedom and living a really amazing life?
Portugal itself is a story of self-discovery and of intentional living. We forget, but it's only been 51 years since the last revolution in Portugal, when they overthrew the dictatorship in 1974. So, that recent history, there are people, I was alive, not in Portugal, but I was alive when the revolution occurred. People we know and have come to know since we've been here were children or teenagers during the revolution. They remember, or certainly their parents do, and lived through it, the hardship and the trials of living under a dictatorship. there's talk of neo-dictators and maybe actual dictators in the world today. Portugal actually lived under legit dictatorship, and that infuses the culture to a degree. It also inspires it. In 1974, they chose a different life, a different path for themselves. It's inspiring. They had a story that had been told to them for generations, since the 20s, the 1920s. So for 50 years, a couple of generations, they lived with this story that they thought was going to be their story forever. They chose. And they chose a different story. They chose a story of freedom for themselves, for their children, for the generations beyond. That's rich. That is the power of story and the power of intentional living. And that's one of the many amazing things about this beautiful country and its people.
How do you hope your channel will serve the people who find it?
What I hope is that it will give people the courage, the permission, if we want to use that language, to follow their story, to create a new story for themselves, but also to allow their story to come through, their personal story, in addition to the stories that they want to tell others. I would hope that it would give people the power, the freedom, the inspiration to live bigger. Story, I'm going to keep coming back to this, but story is one of the most important factors of human living that there is. It shows us a different way of being. It shows us how our way of being can be different, bigger. It may not even have to change that much. It can just be more of the story that we're living that serves us even better. For some people, it may be a radical change. For some, it's just more of what they have, believing that it can be more. It can be bigger. I guess I just hope that it will inspire people both to look within and look farther beyond what their everyday horizon is, to climb higher so they can see farther. I would like them to find maybe new tools, new ways of being, different manners of living that can serve them better, to help them find more, and maybe to discover a new way of living, a new way of being, a new way of creating that can enrich their lives and help all of us create the world and shape it into a better form than it was when we got here.
What sort of community would you like to build here?
I don't know that I have a specific community in mind. Maybe I should envision that so I can create it with more intention. I would hope it would be people of curiosity, people of goodwill, people who can live large, who can plumb the depths of creativity and consciousness, both the deeper levels of consciousness and the higher ones, to find lessons. You know, I am a very introverted person, but I'm able to draw lessons. I can be surprised by the lessons I can learn from other people sometimes. I tend to be fairly self-contained, somewhat isolated, insular. But when a stranger comes along, or even someone within my circle, but someone outside of my skull can teach me a lesson, it's so much more powerful. because I know I'm not just talking to myself. The universe is speaking to me through someone else. So I would want to find a community of open-hearted, big-hearted people who love story and storytelling, who are natural-born creatives, or even who have grown into the path of creativity, and people who want to join together, combine their stories, share their stories with one another, who can support one another in their storytelling, and together we can dream a bigger world.
And finally, what legacy of story would you like to leave behind?
Well, we're on the cusp of longevity, escape velocity, so if all goes well, I won't need to leave a legacy. But that said, if I can be part of creating a world where we value story, where we see the power that story has for personal change, for external change, for making the world better, for making people better. If I could have a small part in making that happen, I'd be happy with that. Thanks for joining me today. That interview is me. That's what this channel is going to be about. And if any of that resonated with you or made you more curious, I hope you'll consider joining this community of mindful storytellers as we explore the nature of story, the purpose of story and creativity, and look at different tools, both ancient and modern, that can help us become better storytellers. So I would encourage you to like, share, comment, subscribe or follow, and become an active part of this community. Throughout the month of October, we'll be getting to know one another. I'll share a little bit more about my journey, more about the runes and different tools that I'm using, how I approach story. For those of you who want to partake in National Novel Writing Month, NaNoWriMo, we can work together to develop our craft, keep each other motivated, and meet that target of a 50,000 word story in just 30 days. Then in December, we'll be summing things up, getting ready for the new energy of the new year, seeing how things go. And on December 31st, we'll gather here for a live rune reading to take a peek ahead and see what 2026 might have in store for us. So thanks for being here, and until next time, may your story guide you well. And we'll be preparing for November, which is NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month, which is not really national. It doesn't have to be a novel. I guess it's a month, so there's that.